But AmericanMinute.com, Bill is just an amazing person. Bill Federer. William J. Federer is a nationally known speaker, best-selling author, and president of the AmeriSearch, Inc., a publishing company dedicated to researching America's noble heritage, the most noble. You can count on one hand the free societies, and we're the best. Television and former U.S. congressional candidate, Bill has appeared on C-SPAN, Fox, Hannity and Combs, O'Reilly Factor, NPR, MSNBC, on and on, 700 Club. And he's just an amazing person. So I'm going to try to sit back, take a few calls at the end for him at 1-800-259-9231. But I'm wound up like a cheap clock here with the news I just covered. Sir, I heard you on Brownfield from a taped interview because Gary was off today, really laying out the history I know, but you said it so well, how they put people's sons to die on starvation torture ships, throwing thousands of our ancestors off per month dead. I didn't hear you talk about it, but I remember reading about it, how they took the family of 11-year-old Andrew Jackson in the Carolinas. His daddy had died working the land. It was him and his mama and brothers, starved him to death in the concentration camp. He wouldn't lick their boots, so they slashed him with a saber across the face. This is the tyranny of government we're fighting, and we see the same arrogance, the same corruption today. And I want folks to know what the men and women, because the women went along with them and supported them, who signed that Declaration of Independence, what happened to them, and what this country's really about. God bless you. Thanks for being here with us.
Well, Alex, it's an honor to be on your program, and I've really appreciated all the great work you've done over the years. On the 4th of July, we do celebrate our great country's beginning, and it's important to look at the place in history. In other words, there's been about 5,000 years of recorded human history. That's all, only about 5,000. That's 50 people living 100 years each, and you're back to the beginning of the Egyptian hieroglyphics and Sumerian cuneiform, little clay tablets. And during that 5,000 years, empires have risen and empires have fallen. Empires have risen and empires have fallen. But power has always been concentrated in the hands of pharaohs, monarchs, sultans, czars, Caesars, Kaisers. In other words, very few people held all the power. Well, America, we had 3,000 miles between us and our king, King George III, so we got a chance to experiment in self-government. They borrowed a lot from the church government because the different colonies were started by different denominations. You know, Virginia by the Anglicans, Massachusetts by Puritans, Rhode Island by the Baptists, and so forth. And so they applied a little bit of this church government to their ideas of self-government, and it worked. And so we became very prosperous. And we had, obviously, the revolution. And so what's happened is we went from the concentrated powers of the monarchs to the separated powers of our Constitution, separated into 3 branches, separated from the federal to the state level, and then tied up with 10 handcuffs we call the first 10 amendments. But over time, power has gravitated toward reconcentrating. So in other words, it was great that Lincoln ended slavery, but in the process, he concentrated a lot of power away from the states. It was Woodrow Wilson got us through World War I, but in the process, he concentrated power with the Federal Reserve and the income tax. Franklin Roosevelt got us through the Depression and World War II, but he concentrated power with his New Deal. Lyndon Johnson concentrated power with his socialist Great Society programs. I mean, socialism is basically I collect everybody's money, put it in a big bag, and you got to come on bended knee, and I give it back to my friends. It's the old saying, whoever controls the purse strings has the power. But President Bush consolidated a whole lot of power in the war on terror and the Homeland Security, and a lot of times it's for an immediate good but a long-term evil. In other words, withholding from your paycheck, that was an emergency effort to get money to fight Hitler. It was called the pay-as-you-go tax. And it was just a temporary thing to hurry up and win the war. Well, guess what? After the war stopped, it didn't. In other words, the federal government got this new power, and it never gave it up. Well, that power has been concentrated, and now it's all been handed over to the new president, and it's been put on steroids. And he's concentrating power, taking over banks and car companies and the health care. I mean, Hitler ran for office in Nazi Germany on promising nationalized health care. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit away from the founders.
And Bill, just interrupt. This is how there's some tyrannies happen overnight, but generally with a society that was already used to being slaves and being bossed around, authoritarian. But with the case of Rome, it's golden era, very pious, focused on the law, incredible. Their strength came from how pious they were, and by the end it was hooking their wives out to be prostitutes, even the gentry, to try to raise money for the emperor, for the Caesar. And so it took a few generations to fully degenerate, but it always accelerates its degeneration in just a few decades. Most of the degeneration happens that took hundreds of years to build towards. Now we see more tyranny, more tyrannical laws, more federalization of water, open borders, the total Federal Reserve dictatorship. All of it is happening, the carbon tax, in just a few months. They're bum rushing us. It's all going to pure tyranny right now.
Yeah, it's like water going down a drain. Around the edges, it goes very slowly, but as it gets close to the center, it goes faster and faster and faster. I mean, that's what happened with power, as I talked about over history. It's happened a little bit here, a little bit there, but now it's gone on exponential curve. And but you know, our founders experienced the King of England was the king of their country, the commander of their military, and the head of their church. In other words, the king decided what the people could believe. It was like hate crime legislation. If you believed the way the king did, you were fine. But if you had other views, then you were not equal before the law.
And they've now had the hate crime bill pass the House that says word for word, if you hurt somebody's feelings, you get arrested. So the end of the First Amendment, stay there. Let's get into the founding of our country with that Mayflower Compact that I had 2 family members that were signatories to. And then we will expand out from there with our guest what the founders went through and then how we rediscover this culture. Because as this tyranny unfolds, we have to show the public what the alternative is, liberty versus the tyranny we're now seeing.
Do you understand how dark it is? How far down the line we are? How late it is?
Yeah, it's sundown on the Union. If you don't think NAFTA and GATT didn't destroy the economy, remember they told us that was going to make jobs. Imagine what their carbon tax is going to do. I've read their own documents here on air. IMF, World Bank, Club of Rome, it's designed to bankrupt things. They want you bankrupt. They want to vertically integrate. They're monopoly men. They're not free market. And they've created this banking crisis to do it. Arrest the bankers. And we do that by starting the audit of the Fed. It'll make Madoff look like a choir boy. Going back to Bill Federer with the website AmericanMinute.com. Okay, Mr. Federer, there's a short segment, long one coming up. Let's start now getting into that Mayflower Compact and then the hell our forefathers went through to fight for this beautiful liberty we've had.
Well, it's interesting. The Pilgrims were going to land in Virginia, which was an Anglican colony, and they got blown off course, and they didn't want to just get off the boat and every man be a law unto themselves, so they decided to write their own government document, the Mayflower Compact. Now, the question is, how did they learn how to do this? Well, guess what? They were all dissenters. They were all basically religious nonconformists. And so when they were in Holland, their pastor was a guy named John Robinson. And he taught them if they have big decisions, they all fast and pray and vote. This was their church government. Well, they basically applied that to this Mayflower Compact. And there's a line in there that says, having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia. It says, mutually in the presence of God, we covenant ourselves together to form a civil body politic and render all due submission to the laws that we pass. In other words, they submitted themselves to each other under God and then created this government and then agreed to submit to the laws. Well, they learned this from the church government. There's no other place that they could have learned it from. And this became a blueprint for Connecticut, which is called the Constitution State. And the Connecticut Constitution became a blueprint for the U.S. Constitution, which starts off, we the people. So in other words, we're granting ourselves permission to start a government.
That's right. Whenever we say in the Declaration of Independence, you know, it talks about how it's our right, it's our duty to throw off tyranny. And when atheists get mad that we say it's God-given, the point is it comes from no man. It is basic, organic rights to be free creatures, sentient beings. And the first time we see this in history is what you're saying is the Mayflower Compact. They are granting among themselves to be governed by themselves by consenting to this law with each other.
Right. I've read through every charter of every colony, and each one of them, it's the monarch granting them permission. And in America, we're not like Canada or Australia where they still acknowledge the monarch of England figure as a figurehead. We simply grant ourselves permission. And the word
That's right.
federal,
We don't have privileges that is something illegal that you're granted to do. A license is authorization to do something that would be prohibited. So it's what a slave has. We are declaring that we are the sovereigns under God and no king but King Jesus. We're not worshiping King George III.
Right. And the word federal means covenant. But you're bringing out a key point where in the Declaration it says all men are created equal. This was revolutionary. All throughout history, there was not equality. If you were friends with the king, you were more equal. If you were enemies of the king, you were less equal.